Dave Copeman, when you see what's been done to the bush at Copeman, do you feel that the politicians are destroying this part of the planet in order to save it?
Yeah, listen, I'm glad that I got the chance to be on tonight to clear up some misconceptions, because it's simply not true that we can protect nature without transitioning to renewables. But the problem we have is our nature laws are inadequate and they're failing to protect threatened species. And this is the case when it comes to wind farms. This is the case when it comes to coal mines. This is a case across the board. We've seen decades of failure from both state and federal laws. Graham Samuels did his review and said that the federal laws were fundamentally failing, and they are failing to protect threatened species. And so we strongly support wind farms. We're going to need lots of them rolling out across Queensland, but they need to be in the right place.
Yeah, except they're not going in the right place, and a lot of locals are upset. I suspect you're going to have a lot of trouble getting local approval for as many wind farms as the government actually wants. But Gary, now the Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, she's deciding, she's taking her time whether to let green developers do to Chalumbin what they've already done to Copeman, in fact, with even taller wind towers. What's the problem there?
The problem there, Andrew, is many problems. One is the height, is they are going to be taller than they are at Copeman. They're up to 250 metres. But the other issue is that it's in high elevation country. It's situated in 750 to 850 metre terrain. It's on ridges. It is a species habitat like the red goshawk, the masked owl, spotted quoll, magnificent brood frog. There are so many species, and because it is right next to, would you believe, the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, which the Labor government stopped in the 1980s. And all of a sudden, we've got another Labor government that wants to do the same thing again, and this time with wind turbines. Not only that, it's a high biodiversity area. It is also the headwaters of the Herbert River, which flows into the Coral Sea. So there's issues about, and because of the high elevation, issues about erosion, runoff, siltation. So all these issues are what we're against. We did a survey for the Chalumbin wind farm that was known as the PER, Preliminary Environment Report. 98% of the submissions, 98% were against it. 2%, 11 submissions in our whole community were in favour of Chalumbin. And that gives you an idea of the feeling of the absolute repulsion to these wind turbines being constructed in high elevation, high biodiversity, high rainfall area of Queensland.
Yeah, and listen,
what's the Queensland Conservation Council's view on this particular one at Chalumbin?
We have concerns about Chalumbin because it's so close to the wet tropics, but there is plenty of room. You know, one thing we're blessed with in Queensland is we have plenty of sun, plenty of wind. What we don't have is the right planning mechanisms to make sure we're putting wind in the right place. Now, that's why we've been advocating really strongly to the state government that they have to change State Code 23. So this is the code under which wind farms are approved at a state level, and the government's listening, and they just recently, about 2 weeks ago, announced a review of that. And what we're demanding is that there's better community consultation, because we can plan the renewables rollout. I think what you'll find for most people across Queensland, they know we need renewables. We can't protect nature without transitioning from dirty, polluting coal to cleaner, cheaper renewables. But we can do that and also protect biodiversity. And we can do that by putting them in the right place. One of the things we've been really strongly advocating for is we need these renewable energy zones where we have transmission lines connecting up batteries, solar and wind in locations where we have the assets we need, the wind and the solar, but we're not putting it up against these old historic lines. The reason they've been building these wind farms in that North Queensland area is because there's a power line that runs up there. It actually runs across the West Tropics. And so they're trying to connect to that. What we need is investment in the transmission and the grid so we can put these in the right place. The problem, Andrew, what we had is we had 10 years.
See, here we go, David. Extra costs. You see, extra costs already. And look, obviously I don't share your view about how desperately we need to move from coal, but that's an argument for another time. My issue is with
talk about it from nature,
the gung-ho support. But just I want to stick to these. My issue is really with the gung-ho support for wind farms. And I remember being concerned with this. One of my favourite drives down the coast past Phillip Island here in Victoria, suddenly, you know, 6 or so hideous wind towers along one of the prettiest views you could have, suddenly spoiling it. Like, oh, that's great. How can you? And you've got, of course, Bob Brown worrying about these wind farms that down off the Tasmanian coast, chewing up eagles and things like that. Isn't there something inherently ugly about wind towers where they, to work best, you've got a quarter of a kilometre of wind tower on a prominent hill dominating the landscape?
Andrew, we're facing twin crises of biodiversity and climate change that are going to fundamentally impact on us. And so I don't worry
chewing up birds.
I don't worry about what a wind farm looks like, but what I do worry about is it impacting on species habitat. No, seriously, I mean, I've lived overseas in Spain where you see these wind turbines everywhere. I actually think they're beautiful, but some people like them, some people don't. What's more important than the aesthetic is actually making sure we manage the transition. This is important for our economy. This is important for our jobs and our future. This is important to address big threats like climate change that is
well, I
driving.
think it hurts all that, but all right.
I don't agree.
All right, well,
let me speak about nature, and this is the point.
Let me take it to Gary then.
With the species that are impacted by this,
go ahead then.
We'll be devastated if we see our climate increase to, we're already at 1.1 degrees. If we get to 2, the magnificent brood frog, the greater glider, all of these, they can't adjust. You know, it's already causing problems for us with nature, with climate change, but it's so much worse for some of these species. That's why we've got to do both. We've got to both protect their habitats and also act on climate change.
I don't go along with that catastrophism, I've got to be honest, but I'm saying you're supporting something that chews up birds because a frog one day might be upset. I'm not sure. But let me go to your point to Gary there. Gary Burgess, you just heard Dave said he doesn't care about the aesthetics, he doesn't care about how they look. I certainly do. Do you?
Yes. Yeah, no, the visual amenity is very important. Why do people live in rural areas? I mean, this whole thing has got no consent from the community. There's no social licence for this whatsoever. It is just an impingement on our local community, who people have come to the bush and homesteaded, raised their children, and we want to see hills. We don't want to see turbines, and at night time, we definitely don't want to see this. And Chalumbin is now going to be 3 times bigger. And so all around Ravenshoe, there's going to be this ethereal sort of Hadean glow at night time. Again, all these studies that they did for the, for the PER to come out, they didn't realise that this light pollution was another effort. And of course, how do you do a field study on night pollution? It's not been done. How do you do a field study on species where the seasons change? They might do a field study as they did for the Chalumbin thing for, 1.5 years of field studies. That is not enough. That's not a baseline. A baseline takes into account the whole of the ecology and the seasons. Our seasons will have dry seasons, we'll have wet seasons, high rainfall, we'll have bushfires, we'll have different flowering of our melaleucas, different flowering of our eucalypts, and all that. How do you squeeze that into a survey that just goes for 1.5 years? So we don't know the impact on all this.
And I've seen what they've done to landscape around my aunt's place in Holland, and I don't want to wish that for Australia. But look, can I just thank you both, Dave Copeman? I know you would have had people in your office saying don't go on Bolt's report. So I appreciate you coming on and being open to a civil debate. I appreciate that, Dave Copeman and Gary Burgess. Thank you both. Thank you very much.